Hello there, my name is Niamh Brannigan and you're listening to the Irish Film London podcast. If you're a regular listener, it's lovely to have you back, and if you're a first timer, welcome. Here on the Irish Film London podcast, we bring you all the latest and greatest talent from Irish film, TV and animation, with recordings of live Q&As and interviews from our festivals and award ceremonies, as well as a host of brand new interviews, one of which I'm delighted to bring you today. In today's episode, Gerry chats to the makers and creators of The Eighth Film, Ailbhe Symth, Andrea, Horan and Lucy Kennedy, a documentary that follows the journey of the people of Ireland coming together to fight for women's reproductive rights, fighting to remove a constitutional ban of abortion, the Eighth Amendment. It shows a country's transformation to a more liberal, secular society. The IFL podcast is completely independent, so I would ask if you enjoy listening to our podcast or you like popping onto our website and checking out the film programmes we've created for you guys, to consider making a donation or becoming a champion. If you're already a member or a champion, we're relaunching our member scheme, so make sure to keep an eye out for any new goodies we have in store for you. Or if money is tight at the moment, even spreading the word about us would be amazing. Just before I hand you over, we'd like to thank Culture Ireland and the Irish Emigrant Support Programme for their ongoing support of our work, including this podcast series. Enjoy, folks.
Okay, so thank you everybody for joining us this evening for an Irish Film London discussion with the filmmakers and participants or cast of a brand new Irish documentary which is due for release soon, called The Eighth. To read a little bit from the official synopsis and to explain to anyone who hasn't heard of The Eighth yet what it is. The Eighth traces Ireland's campaign to remove the Eighth Amendment, a constitutional ban on abortion. It shows a country's transformation from a conservative state enthralled to the Catholic Church to a more liberal, secular society. The Eighth includes voices from both sides of the debate, but its primary focus is on the dynamic female identities of the pro-choice campaign. The film follows the veteran campaigner Ailbhe Symth, who joins us tonight, self-described glitter activist Andrea Horan, who's also here with us, and as they chart a bold strategy of grassroots activism and engineer the impossible. This dramatic story is underscored by a vivid exploration of the wrenching failures that led to this defining moment in Irish history. Before we start into our discussion with Ailbhe and Andrea and one of the film's directors, Lucy Kennedy, I'd like to quickly show you the trailer for The Eighth, which I will try and share with you now.
Every now and then an issue comes before us which challenges us to think about our history. Whether it's the damp cold of the Magdalen laundries or the sundered silence of mother and baby homes being broken. All of these things are connected by the way we as a country have treated women, and particularly pregnant women.
Women's health is at risk, women are still in danger, women are still taking the abortion pill illegally. We absolutely have to do something.
Investigation is underway into the death of Savita Halappanavar.
This government needs to introduce emergency legislation to protect women's lives. And if they don't, we will bring this government down.
Repeal me!
After decades of uncertainty, the process has started that could herald the biggest change ever in Ireland's law on abortion.
Our choice! Our choice!
This was the most divisive issue in Ireland ever.
The answer is just get rid of it, instead of, what do you need?
Suddenly what's being proposed is a completely unrestricted liberal abortion regime. That's the shock factor.
Not the church, not the state!
It's murder, can you not see it's murder?
Whilst we're voting on reproductive health care and abortion rights, it's actually about the value that we're putting on women in Irish society, saying that we do value them, we do trust them.
It's only women who are not trusted to make decisions about their own health care. Men aren't asked ridiculous questions.
Imagine if you could get this army of women putting that pressure on and to feel empowered.
Just for 1 week to do it. We've waited 35 years.
and we're going to bring it home.
Well, there it is. So I'd like to give a really warm welcome and say hello to Ailbhe Symth, Andrea Horan, and Lucy Kennedy. Thank you all for joining us this evening. How are you all doing?
Well, I mean, how well can anybody be doing right now, actually, Gerry? So I would like to give my standard Irish answer, sure, I'm grand, which actually means nothing.
Cool. What about yourself, Andrea?
Yeah, trucking along, doing my bits. What can you be doing? Just
Cool.
getting on with it.
Cool. Well, look, thanks both of you for joining us. Lucy, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about the film itself first of all, before we talk about the content and the sort of the activist angle that's behind it. But to set the scene, we're having this conversation really as part of Irish Film London's St. Bridget's Day celebrations, which we're doing in conjunction with the Embassy of Ireland in Great Britain. So there's a number of cultural organisations across London and elsewhere who are celebrating the sort of in Balkan St. Bridget's weekend. And all of the activities that we're doing as a film organisation are celebrating the role of females on film and Irish female-led film projects. So within that context, it really makes sense for us to be having a conversation about a film which, although it's not out yet, we really want to start a conversation about what you're saying in the 8th and what that means for women's rights and reproductive rights and all sorts of issues in Ireland. On that note, I kind of want to start a bit by talking about the journey of the film, like because your coverage of these proceedings, like they go back to way before the excitement of the protests and the referendum campaigning period itself. So, Lucy, I wondered if, from the filmmaker's perspective, if you would be able to talk about like how the project started and how it came about.
Yeah, so the project started back in 2016. There are 3 directors on it, myself, Aideen Kane and Maeve O'Boyle, and we're all filmmakers with different expertise. Aideen is mainly a producer. She's based in New York. Maeve is based in Dublin, although worked for years and years in New York and is an editor-producer. And I come to it from a more journalistic producing background. So both Maeve and Aideen knew each other for years, and they had independently wanted to do a project, do something around the 8th Amendment, because we all grew up under the shadow of the 8th Amendment. I remember the campaign, which for anyone who doesn't know, I'm sure a lot of people on this call do know, but, equated the right to life of the quote unquote unborn with the mother or the pregnant woman. So we were all deeply affected by it, but it was really, so Maeve and Aideen knew each other, they came together, and then I met Aideen in New York, and it's such a big sort of enterprise that she invited me to join the 2 of them in making and directing this film. So that's how the 3 of us came together, and we spent about a year just researching the issue. And then, move forward with production and finding the right people to follow, and then events happened very quickly.
And what's it like? I suppose you probably hear this quite a lot now. What's it like being like one of 3 directors on a project like this? I mean, is there like a division of duties that is quite natural, or is there a process? Is there like a lot of 3-way meetings to make decisions on creative stuff, or how did it go?
Yeah, no, it was a really great, collaboration. The truth about filmmaking, especially documentary filmmaking, is it's an incredibly collaborative process. And I sort of resist, there is this myth in my mind of the sort of auteur director, that's the one person's vision. And that does, with a Kubrick or something like that, that definitely does exist. But for us, it was the collaboration, it was too big for any one of us to start, for starters, but also we each were in Ireland at different points. Maeve was here, and could follow more of the things on the ground. And we were, there's a whole sort of fundraising process that goes into making an independent documentary as well. But when a push came to shove and we had decisions to make, there was a sort of, we agreed very early on it was going to be a democracy. So if there were two people who felt strongly about something and one person didn't, we'd thrash it out, but we'd go with the two people. But to be honest with you, we had heated arguments definitely in the edit, but we all really like each other and respect each other, and all bring very different things to it as well. So no, it worked out remarkably well, I have to say.
That's really good to know. As a filmmaker myself, I know that it's often an achievement in and of itself to still be friends with each other after a really long project. So fair play to you.
Yeah, and it's not like we didn't have moments of tension. We certainly did, but they were never personal. It was always about the project or time or that kind of thing.
Yeah. So starting in 2016 and getting the project off the ground, what was the first stepping stone into making this into like a creative documentary that you can pitch to industry or raise finance for?
Well, we started very, in 2016, we all have other jobs. Like, this was an absolute labor of love, and we all work in the industry in different capacities. But, we 8 a.m. New York time, 1 p.m. Irish time, we had a call once a week, and we'd go through sort of the issue, what we were reading on it, what we were watching for inspiration. And, that was sort of a year of our time, and also looking at figuring out trying to finance the film. And the Irish Film Board came on board. A couple of places came on board early on, which made an enormous difference. Like, there's a producer at the Irish Film Board, Leslie McKim, and she really believed in the project. And there was another person at the Open Society Institute who really believed in the project. So they came on board. And then the next big thing was figuring out who we were going to follow in the documentary.
And then I suppose you came across your lovely contributors, Ailbhe and Andrea.
Yeah. Well, so, Ailbhe was an absolute no-brainer, because she had been involved in the movement and is a very well-known activist in Ireland, and, really has been there, fighting for this issue for decades. And we were really lucky. Maeve was the first person who met Ailbhe, and we were trepidatious about like whether we would, get whether she'd be okay with us following her and all of that sort of stuff. So Maeve first, and then Maeve and Aideen met with Ailbhe, and then gradually we got to know Ailbhe. And I think she's a very sort of like discerning person. So it wasn't like open arms immediately, but we actually became friends. And then Andrea, like, so much of this movement is about a younger generation in Ireland, and a generation who I think came of age and were just sort of like, what on earth is going on? Like, we don't have these rights. And they didn't, I sort of see myself as part of the last, Andrea and I are similar enough in age, but I definitely grew up still in that kind of very ecclesiastically kind of constrained Ireland. And I think there was a new generation of people that Andrea was championing, and people also who weren't necessarily interested in politics and issues. And she had just this unique and very, very positive way of approaching the issue. So she's just so dynamic, as you see in the film. So like it was a no-brainer once we met Andrea. And then we were lucky enough that she also said yes. So we got lucky, you know, because it's a big commitment for people to give up that much of their time, especially when they're fighting a massive issue, you know. So yeah, we were lucky.
So Andrea, maybe that's the point to bring you in then, because like your contribution in the film is it's summed up by what Lucy says. I mean, I wonder, like, as opposed to Ailbhe, who's got a sort of like a legacy of activism that is like recognizable in a more traditional sense, like what was it that brought you to your position as a quote unquote activist for this issue?
I suppose I never really considered myself an activist per se, and I'd worked in marketing for so many years. And when I left marketing, I set up my own business that was very much about doing my own stuff. And it's a nail bar. So I was seeing all these women all the time who were affected by these policies, who didn't have maybe the words or the way to communicate how they felt about it. And reading, I suppose, a lot of women's media, it was kind of overlooked. And the more and more I got into the issue myself, the more I realized that I could use my skills that I had to bring an audience along and go to where people were, rather than expecting them to come to where other people were. So like we were very focused on kind of, as I say, the glitter activism. It was kind of trying to bring people into the fray in a fun way, so that like these are human rights we're talking about, but at the same time that doesn't mean we like, there's a place for anger, but there's also a place for the joy that goes along with having autonomy over your own body. So yeah, that was something I tapped into, and using my marketing experience and PR, I was able to kind of put together an approach that was very focused on my ways of working that I'd worked on for so long. So it was just using my skills. And I think that is why I agreed to be in the film, because everything that when I started, I was very cognizant that it wasn't about me, and the ego that goes along with that is something that I don't really like getting into. So I was kind of a bit like, oh God, a film. But at the same time, I was like, if other people see that you can use the skills that you have to get things over the line, rather than having to follow what is traditionally an activist route, that you can contribute in your own way. And if that's something that can come out of that, then it would be silly not to do it. So yeah, that was kind of what made me buy in. And obviously I loved the women.
My next question to you, after looking at that clip, Andrea, was to ask you whether you feel like whether you feel any different in your role as an activist now, or whether you think the experience of going through all this since 2018 and the success that the campaign had, whether that has changed your opinion on activism in general, or just your outlook on everything.
Has it changed my outlook? I think it's definitely been a journey, and I've definitely learned a lot as I've gone along of how things work in the bigger picture of politics. And like, I wasn't very political at the outset, let's say. Now I have a current affairs podcast, so that in itself would give it away. But I think, did it change me? I think it cemented my own beliefs of how I approach things. So whatever I believe in, I'll bring the kind of same activism to, and the same action. So yeah, I think it definitely broadened my horizons, broadened my capacity to believe that you can change things, and that everyone is possible of that, and everyone deserves to have their voice heard.
That's really lovely. Right, I'm going to try this again and see if I can get this clip going for everyone.
Are you fresh? Ready to pound the pavements? Good. I'm just doing my makeup here now in Trop Pop, and then going to collect everything in the office, and then over. We'll be there for 12:30. I'd be in Tropical Popco and ask the girls who work there, and I'd be like, how are you going to vote in the general election? And at the time they were like, oh, I don't know, I might not vote. No wonder politicians don't put women's issues as red line issues.
Will it pop in a second, Tom?
I kind of was like, imagine if you could get this army of women who are totally disengaged and get them to engage a little bit more and to start putting that pressure on and to feel empowered. You do you and I'll do me, honey, but like people are so different that there has to be different ways for people to absorb their messages. To reach a full society, you have to appeal to a full society.
This is an exciting day.
Love it. Amazing. That's an amazing place. I absolutely love those little repeal hearts on the nails and everything. That's a skill I don't have.
I don't have it either, don't worry. It's a very intricate detail.
Good stuff. So Ailbhe, to move on to you, your background and your experience in activism and the approach that you have to the issue is quite different and from where Andrea comes from. I wonder if you would tell us a little bit about your background as an activist and what brought you to leading the campaign for the referendum.
Well, first of all, I think when I listen to Andrea and when I think back on the work that Andrea and the women that she was involved with in the Unreal Issues and Trop Pop and so on were doing, it just makes the point so absolutely clearly that there isn't one way of being an activist. There isn't one way of campaigning. And that was particularly important, I think, for us in the repeal campaign, or certainly I was something I felt very strongly about from the very beginning, which goes back to 2012, 2013, that when you're fighting a referendum, when you're fighting to have a referendum, when you actually do have the referendum, it's not the same as oppositional radical protest politics, which I do have a history in, but that's not what you're doing in a referendum campaign. You're seeking to appeal to the people, in this case, the people of Ireland, who are and really strongly consider themselves to be absolutely sovereign in this regard. Nobody, politicians or anybody else, tells us what to do in a referendum campaign. That's what we do. But you have to interest the people. You have to rouse their curiosity. You have to involve them. You have to engage them. And that was exactly what Andrea was doing. So whether she likes it or not, I think it's an absolutely valid form of activism. In fact, it is an extremely important way because people end up saying, oh my God, I'm not talking about Andrea, but a lot of the women choose, oh my God, I'm an activist, I was involved, I did this. And I think that's also hugely important for young women to get that sense that they were actually the people who moved this terrible amendment out of our constitution. So it's really one of the things that I have found certainly in referendum campaigns is that you campaign differently, but that each referendum brings new learning. I think this time, certainly for the 8th, it was so enormous. I think it probably changed a bit anyway, everybody who was involved in it, because you really did have that sense without blowing any kind of trumpet that we were making history. It felt like that, and I think we did, because it was the whole weight of Catholicism in the past and a very conservative state continuing into the present, and deep, deep, deep patriarchal structures of dislike and hatred and ill treatment and suffering for women, which of course, have also come to light through the mother and baby homes and other scandals. I mean, I go back quite a long way to the end of the 70s, beginning of the 80s, and when I was involved in the women's movement, and I was there in 1983, not actually in Ireland for a lot of the time, but when I was campaigning to keep the 8th out of the constitution, and then subsequently when we had other referendum campaigns. But I mean, I haven't only campaigned on, I'm sure everybody listening or watching or part of this conversation this evening knows, I mean, there was so much that we had to get out of the way in Ireland, and still do in many ways, that you it was just going from one referendum campaign to another. So there was the issue of abortion, of course, but there was also divorce twice. In 86 and again in 95, which was very, very, very trying and very challenging and demanding because we lost and then we just about won. And then, of course, there was the marriage equality referendum in 2015, which I was very centrally involved in. And I had figured out back in 2012, 2013, because I was working with the marriage equality people, that if we could win, if we got a referendum on marriage equality, and if we could win that, which I thought we possibly, well, around about 2013, 14, I thought we could, that if we could do that, it would open up space for people to see the possibility of change and the potential of campaigning, and particularly the potential of campaigning using social media and so on. So the strategy for appeal goes back a really long way. So to pick up another thread of your story, when Lucy and Maeve and Aideen approached me, I mean, Lucy was saying, oh, we didn't know, you were awestruck, and Ailbhe's very discerning. Ailbhe was looking around for people who were going to record for us what I thought would really be a historical event if we won, and if we didn't win, well, it would still be of interest. But I mean, I really felt very strongly that what we were doing, and there were so many incredible people involved by 2016, because we had the Coalition to Repeal the Eighth Amendment, which was bringing together all kinds of organisations. That was how I got to know Andrea, who joined up with the Unreal Issues, and which I still think is the best incomprehensible title for a group I've ever come across. But anyway, I loved it. I loved it. I loved her from the moment she hit the ground running. You know, I thought, oh my God, she is so dynamic. But you know, it for all of these incredible people involved, you knew, or I really felt it in my bones or in my waters, as my Belfast granny used to say. I felt it in my waters that this was something we could really shift, that we could really do it, that we could topple down this terrible, terrible structure that we were carrying on our shoulders as women, and that we absolutely had to have this recorded. So I hope, not at all a personally vain sense, but I mean, there was that sense that we had to leave a legacy. And I say not personally vain because I think one of the things that you really learn in campaigning very strongly is that you are not doing it for yourself. If you're doing it to advance, I don't know, some kind of particular vanity project you have, you're not going to get anywhere. People see through you, they don't believe you, you're wasting your time, you won't achieve it anyway. So it is when that passion and commitment are there, and you know that something is really important, that's when you also know that you've got to leave some kind of a record so that people will know how hard it was. Because I think now people often, they say things like, but you won so quickly. And I'm thinking, what? You mean like from January to May? I say to them, 1983, 1982, 1981, when the small pro-choice group started in Ireland. I mean, you know, that is all written on my body. There's a whole history there written on my body, in my head and in my feelings. It took decades and decades for us, and many, 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 many women and men to do that. So this notion that we did it very fast, people don't understand that there was long planning. And of course, there was a huge amount, sadly, there was a huge amount of experience of being involved in referendums, and that we knew how to lose because we had lost before. What we weren't sure of was how to win. And this time we absolutely had to think strategically about how do you win. And you win by drawing in the people. And that's what Andrea was done. There's a shot of Andrea in the film where she's tugging on a rope. And she always has, it's my favorite shot of her, actually. She's tugging on the rope. But it's not just because it's Andrea being Andrea, if you like. It's because it represents that sense of pulling in the people, pulling in the opinion, making it come together so that it coalesces and it gels, and ultimately comes out as an absolutely overwhelming yes. In, you know, one of the biggest turnouts in a referendum in Ireland ever, we also got one of the highest yeses ever, even higher than for marriage equality.
Well, let's take another little look at what some of that organising yielded on the streets in another clip I've got for you.
I have to say, standing here in front of you now, and as I was coming down on Conn Street, I was truly overwhelmed with very profound emotion, with emotion which is very real.
Warder, can you not see it's Warder?
Such energy. That is amazing. Some of the chants from those protests have stayed with me for a long time afterwards.
That was an incredible evening. The chap with his crucifix was finally dragged off, and about six or 9 months later, this young man stopped me on Stephen's Green, actually, and he said to me, he said, "Hi," he said, "I'm the one who pulled your man with the crucifix off." And it was only in Dublin could that happen, I suppose.
Stephen's Green of all places.
Yeah.
True stuff. Well, look, I'll kind of open this out to everyone, in a sense, as we move on in the conversation. But it's a film about activism, and it's a film about a hugely divisive issue in the country, or at least an issue which involved a really divisive campaign. But there's a sense that, of course, although as documentarians, Lucy, you and your fellow directors want to present the facts and present a sense of objectivity of how things really happened, but like probably like most people who are on the call and ourselves, we normally pick a side, essentially. And of course we focused in the 8th on one side of the campaign, and the side that you as filmmakers kind of believe in as an issue. I wondered if you could talk a little bit about the role that objectivity plays in presenting a point of view in a project like this.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I think everybody has a point of view. So I think there's a difference between objectivity and fairness. And I think that with this documentary, we all came in with a point of view. We were very clear to everybody we spoke with that we had a point of view, but we also wanted to be fair. I mean, there are people in my life, and I know my co-director's life, who we love dearly, who have different opinions to us. So there was no desire on our behalf to sort of vilify people that we don't agree with. And in fact, I think there were a couple of reasons it was so important to show the other point of view. One being, that is sort of it showed what like Ailbhe and Andrea were up against in part as well, and it also represents a portion of the electorate and the Irish people, and I think, funnily enough, I think we would have even incorporated the other side a little bit more if we had have gotten more access. I think that they were naturally enough skeptical of us, and there were a lot of people who wouldn't speak to us also. But the irony is we didn't want to show things in a very black and white way. We wanted to give people the opportunity to present their point of view.
I think you've definitely, as a documentary, it's definitely something that, which, although it's an access documentary in the sense that it focuses on the Yes campaign and Ailbhe and Andrea and those activists, you've given a lot of screen time to a varying number of views on the No campaign side and a lot of people on the doorstep as well.
Yeah.
So I suppose the question then is how important it is to ensure that all those that spectrum of possibilities, that spectrum of opinion is represented.
I mean, I think it's important. I mean, firstly, it makes the film much more nuanced as well to show differing perspectives. It wasn't just kind of a pure sort of activist taking one side and one point of view. I think, and we were lucky with some of the interactions were very interesting on the doorsteps as well, and it showed the challenges and what Ailbhe and Andrea and the whole movement was up against as well. So I think every issue is different, but I think for our film and for us, it was important to have that voice in there, definitely.
There's a scene at the end of the film, at the climax of the referendum result, where everyone's gathered at Dublin Castle, and there's this huge sort of like it's already a celebration. The exit polls had been released at that stage, and we're kind of just waiting to hear what the official result is. And there's something in the audience that I saw, and that we asked people on their social media channels this week to submit any questions for yourselves, and someone brought it up as well. There's placards that people are holding, and one of them that really stands out to me says, "The North is next." And I wondered whether anyone wanted to comment on that in any way.
Well, I think during the campaign, that was something that we were very, very conscious of. And it's I think, also important to say that was also true in relation to marriage equality, and that this was the first time in the history of the Irish state that we had been more progressive, or seemed to be more progressive in relation to social and sexual issues than the North. So it was a really, again, historically, a very, very interesting moment. And I had certainly been up and down between the North and the South during the marriage equality campaign. And similarly then for abortion, there was a lot of toing and froing. So the Alliance for Choice, which was the big still is the big Northern Irish organisation, was a member of the coalition to repeal the 8th Amendment, and many people came over the border to campaign in sort of Louth and Monaghan and the other border counties in particular. And there was a very real sense that if we won in the South, that it would be incredibly difficult for the North to hold out for very much longer. And that turned out to be true, although it happened via Westminster. But I think it also serves in kind of the bigger picture in the longer term to sort of show how foolish and how wasteful it is to have this toing and froing and coming and going and divisions on what is a very small island. And that, I think, has been shown even more strongly now during COVID. And the interesting thing that it is not necessarily people who are Republicans, it's not necessarily people even who are terribly nationalist who are saying this. A lot of people are saying it from social and economic and health perspectives, that this is a really small island and small island, and we should really be working together. So I think that those referendums and the changes in the North are all serving to be part of that change of mood and change of view, which we see reflected in polling quite recently. So it's a really interesting kind of longer impact of the socio-sexual referendums, perhaps particularly on abortion, actually. So it's very, very interesting. But it was great to have that sense that we were campaigning together and that continued on with the North struggle. Still does.
Yeah. Do you think that there's been real material change, especially in reproductive rights in Ireland since the referendum result, or how much more work do you think there is to do now?
Well, taking the Eighth Amendment out of the Constitution was removing an obstacle rather than setting up something. So it was an absolutely crucial first step. But the work of getting a law in place, which we do have, but getting it so that it's going to meet the real needs of real women is in itself a job of work. Moving the health service around from the principle that abortion was a crime and also a mortal sin to understanding that it's a legal right in Ireland, that it is not a crime to have an abortion, that the health service is obliged to provide abortions within the framework of the law. So all of that, I think, demonstrates that it is a process. And I think but that being said, I think that already it has made a very material difference to women, because we do have abortion on request up to 12 weeks, which effectively is 9 weeks, but for one reason or another. Although after that period of time, abortion is very much more limited, which shows still the continuing ambivalence, not only in Ireland, but throughout the world, that, a little bit of abortion is okay, but not more. And, that doesn't make sense, because, you're not a little bit pregnant, or, it's like you are, you aren't. And I think in terms of shifting attitudes, there is a very long way to go. But this is not just about abortion, and it never was. This is about the control of women, and it is about power, and it is about male power. So we have to you can just never take your eye off it. You have to keep watching it all the time. But in the meantime, women are having their abortions in Roscommon or in Cork or in Galway or in Dublin or Limerick or whatever it is. And hopefully the law will be expanded somewhat when it's up for review in a year's time, just over a year, under a year actually. Sorry, I seem to have kind of lost out on a COVID year there.
Oh yeah,
Review in
I think
January
we all did. Yeah.
2022.
Andrea, do you feel like the referendum result and what it meant for people, what it does still mean for people, do you think that it's left a sense of empowerment, a sense of possibility for further change? Do you feel like, when you're talking to people about these issues now, does it feel more hopeful now that there's been a bit of a win around this referendum?
Yeah, absolutely. And if there wasn't as well, I think so many people have been mobilized from the marriage equality referendum and from the eighth referendum, because these were issues that affected their day-to-day lives, and the tit for tat shenanigans that go on in the Dáil or the whatever may not be of interest to so many people, but when it affects you kind of dive in. And I think if you look at me in particular, I wasn't political and now I'm really interested in it. So with me as an example, that's one, but also then all the girls who came along on the journey and who are now going off in their own directions and their own campaigning and whatever those things are that affect them. So 100%. And I think that the referendum was really I hate the word empowering, but because anyway, that's a different story. But I think it has definitely given the women of Ireland the kind of confirmation that they can achieve and do what they need to do. And I think there's definitely seems to be a change in tone in what we want from our politicians as well. There's a call for more empathy, there's a call for more understanding, and the kind of old way of politics seems to be fading out a little bit. Now obviously it's not fading out fast enough, but there is more women going into politics, there is more things coming up that are relevant to women, like even this period product that is there's 2 bills on the table for that at the moment. So things like that are being brought to the table that wouldn't have been in the past because of representation, because of people being empowered, and because of the belief that there is the possibility of change, and that there's less, there seems to be less ego. And I think that came from a lot in the referendums, because you were doing something that was totally not for just about you, it was for the greater good. So there is this kind of lack of ego. People are requiring that from their public officials, and that it is more about social issues and rather than party politics a lot of the time. So I think definitely the referendums have kind of hopefully moved people along in what they want from their politicians and what they demand.
But one of the ways that I noticed it, Gerry, is just recently, I was just thinking about it the other day, and I think it kind of chimes with what Andrea was saying, is that women have really been very much to the fore, prominent in Black Lives Matter Ireland, and, you know, are really kind of taking those sort of leadership, spokesperson roles. And that really wouldn't have happened some years ago. And I do think that that the sense of what you can do in social movements has been hugely buoyed up by the referendums, obviously, and that women in particular feel, which was very necessary, feel greater agency. I share Andrea's dislike of empowerment, but, you know, feel a greater sense of agency, but also quite simply are expressing their anger and their frustration, and are more ready to do that and to stand up and fight for it. And that goes, there's a new group, for example, Disabled Women Ireland has formed, and it was formed not exclusively, but quite substantially by 2 women who were very active in the repeal movement. So you sort of see all of those sort of tentacles kind of reaching out, which is quite amazing, really.
Well, on that really, really hopeful note, we will wrap up our conversation for the evening. The only thing left for me to ask, which is the other question that I got a lot of this weekend, is when is it out? When can people see the 8th?
So in the UK, there will be a theatrical release early summer. And in the UK, there's a very good infrastructure around online theatrical releases. So even if cinemas are closed, people will be able to view the film online. We haven't made the announcement yet, but definitely keep an eye on our social media feeds, and we will Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, we will be promoting it all there. We have on our website as well, there's a sign up page for information.
Amazing.
Which is just the8film.com.
Great. And your socials, I know your Twitter is the 8th film. Where can we find the other ones?
Andrea. I'm pretty sure they're all
at the 8th film.
The 8th film. They're all the 8th film. They're all.
Actually, you can find them if you go looking for it, right?
The website has links to everything.
Exactly, the8film.com.
Good stuff. Go to the8film.com, sign up to the mailing list, look out for information. Ailbhe, Andrea, Lucy, thank you so much for joining me. It's been really lovely to talk to you about a really lovely film. I remember flying into Dublin Airport the weekend of the referendum. I was on a plane that was almost full of repeal t-shirts, and there was lots of hugs, and it was a lovely time. And it's been lovely to relive it this week. So thank you all so much, and best of luck with the release.
Thank you so much.
What an incredible interview with amazing women. One thing I'm definitely going to take away from that interview is that there isn't one way of being an activist. The 8th is now showing in cinemas across the UK in over 45 different venues. Check out their socials for all the location details, and there's also virtual screening options on their website, the8film.com. That's it from us here today. Thank you so much for listening. I hope this chat educated and inspired you as much as it did me. Don't forget to follow us on social media. Simply search for Irish Film London on Facebook, Instagram and Twitter. A final thank you to the Irish Emigrant Support Programme and Culture Ireland, who've been brilliant supporters of ours for years. Gur míle maith agat. The Irish Film London podcast is produced by me, Niamh Brannigan. Our interviewer today was the head of Irish Film London, Gerry Maguire, and our theme music is by Kevin MacLeod. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you again very soon.